Ron Kitchens joins us now on the record. Good to have you with us. When we first met, it was in an architecture firm downtown. They were cutting a ribbon because
HOK.
HOK, one of the firms that builds skyscrapers. And it was interesting. They were cutting a ribbon because the company was deciding to stay. What does it say about the state of a city when they cut a ribbon when someone decides not to leave?
It says, welcome to America. You know, you can read any headline in any newspaper, any broadcast around the country. Wall Street Journal had a feature this week about Denver.
I was relieved it wasn't about St. Louis.
That's right. I mentioned St. Louis in the article, but we, downtowns are tough between COVID, between work from home, between the changing nature of living and interacting. They're tough, and they're tough everywhere. So if you're not celebrating, matter of fact, if you're a community that's not celebrating companies staying and growing, you're making a mistake.
You said openly then in our first discussion that there was something of a doom loop discount. Mm-hmm. One of your pitches to bring investors to buy buildings in St. Louis is that you can get that discount here. We're seeing that in the headlines just this week. You've called St. Louis a buyer's market. The Bank of America Plaza, 759,000 square foot, fourth largest office building in the region, now going to auction next month with a $2 million starting bid. The same building sold for $47 million 15 years ago. At what point does a buyer's market become something harder to describe?
I think the issue, and as the Wall Street Journal talked this week in their article about Denver, really all downtowns, with the exception of maybe Manhattan, are in this kind of buyer's market. So what we've got to do is become hyper competitive in that. Otherwise, we're just the same as everybody else. You know, I think they reference a building in Denver that just sold for $5 million. That was $100 million, 10 years ago. So what we've got to do is create additional advantages.
What persuades you that all this is worth it? I mean, what if 10 years from now, nobody does the skyscraper thing anymore?
I don't think people will do skyscrapers anymore at scale. I think there may only be one under construction in the country outside of Austin, Atlanta, and Manhattan. So it's a tough market to do big, tall buildings. I think Americans have decided they want to be horizontal, not vertical.
You're talking about building new ones. We're talking about just filling the empty ones.
Yeah, well, I think that's a residential strategy, and it's about reinventing what we think of downtowns. Downtowns weren't built to be housing. They were built to be commerce centers that the doors closed up at 5 o'clock and everybody went back to their homes. And we're really changing the paradox.
And it costs money to convert those spaces from the commerce to residential. There is some incentive coming from Jefferson City to do just that right now. This new bill would stack public subsidies on top of historic tax credits, potentially covering 70%, maybe even more of a renovation cost in a building like 909 Chestnut, the old AT&T tower.
Yep.
Your organization is also, at the same time that help is coming from Jefferson City, Greater St. Louis Inc. is advocating for the city to carve money out of the Rams settlement funds and help stabilize downtown in particular. Did you hear some of the contentious feedback from some of the tornado survivors this week at City Hall?
Did.
What do you make? How do you define the economic or the regional divisions, the fault lines that exist in this city between downtown and North City?
So I think there's a couple things. We have to remember the Rams settlement money, a lot of that comes because of the negative impact the Rams leaving had on downtown and had on the urban core. So that was the first place negatively impacted, was downtown. So it makes sense for downtown to be part of the discussion. Now we have to fully acknowledge that both the tornado damage as well as historic disinvestment on the north side is real. It's human, it's painful, and we've got to understand that we've got to do more than, frankly, we can afford to do. And I've heard estimates of $2 billion to rebuild it. I don't know if that's a guess or if that's accurate, but it's going to be expensive to get people back into housing on the north side. But the reality is we have to do both. You can't just fix things if you don't have a system to pay for the future growth and future opportunities. So we've got to create more and better jobs, which is what downtown is about, that creates revenue that then feeds the city's tax coffers, that then the alders can disperse as they see fit on public projects.
That's the math argument that one of your advocates brought to City Hall.
Yep.
That for 4% of the land mass of downtown, it produces 20% of the tax revenue. That if you give us money, we're a good investment, we'll turn that $4 into $20 or,
Yep.
you know, roughly, we'll generate more money and
Yep.
that'll go to schools, it'll go to pay for roads and everything. But isn't that the trickle-down argument?
Oh, no, it's real. I mean, the economics of a new convention in downtown produces real dollars in real time. And if we don't make the
For whom?
investments for the city, I mean, those tax dollars, whether it's the sales tax or the earnings tax, those dollars are real, they're trackable, and they're documentable. So this isn't voodoo economics. This is real. And then on top of that, we've got to understand that, we look at things like the data center at the Armory. That's projected year one at $40 million in new tax revenue for the city and the schools. Those are real dollars. And frankly, that's the only way we're going to get enough new revenue in to cover past underspending on things like water. We've got a lot of unfunded liabilities on water that have got to get fixed. We've got to fix not fix is the wrong word, we've got to address the north side housing and community investment. But to do that, there aren't enough existing dollars. It has to be new dollars, and new dollars only come from growing the economy.
And right now in the growth sectors, it's big tech, it's AI, so that's really where most of it is coming from.
Yep.
If you look at the investment reports, and there's a reality to what the market has. I want to ask you, though, to address some of the people, you don't have to talk to me, but to the people who are some of your institution's deepest critics. A man named Dr. Michael McLemore testified at City Hall that Greater St. Louis, Inc. should, quote, change their name to Greater Downtown because, in his words, they don't give a damn about the rest of the city. He's a tornado survivor. I was there and saw his family in the immediate aftermath when they lost their home, when their insurance company told them that they wouldn't be able to fully cover their house. What's your answer to him directly?
Well, I think that's, I'm sorry that he feels that way. First and foremost, we have to acknowledge that his feelings are real. I think a lot of them come from the pain of what has happened to he and his family. So I acknowledge that. But, we're well documented that we're working across sectors. We're working on big projects like Boeing and ensuring that the growth is taking place there, that getting their headquarters relocated there, working to grow data centers in as far away as Montgomery County and as close as the Armory. We're working on community projects and art projects throughout the community. We have got a whole small business strategy we're working on with predominantly underfunded, underactivated people to be able to start businesses, grow their businesses. We have a leadership program that's region-wide. So perhaps he doesn't know all the work we're doing. That's our fault, not his.
I heard you rattle off the list of work. We got a lot going on here, and I understand you have a focus.
More and better jobs, number one focus.
And I hear that. That's your goal. One of the problems that St. Louis has right now is this emergency of the tornado recovery, and the federal government and HUD and Congress just hasn't put money into housing.
Yep.
They haven't put money into the permanent rebuild side. Do you think if corporate, civic, and philanthropic leaders in the greater St. Louis area were more vocal, calling on members of Congress, calling on the president to send that money, to send that relief, that maybe this would be an easier pill for them to swallow, the Rams money downtown being divided up?
Maybe. I think there's an assumption that that's not happening.
Is it happening?
And it is happening. We're pushing.
How and where would we see the evidence of that?
Well, I think, those are those meetings that we're having pushing folks. The reality is, under the current administration, emergency preparedness has been dramatically cut back. The expectation that the federal government is going to come in and provide the services that they provided in the past, I think, is a misnomer.
Is that fair? Because
they're not.
That feels like a raw deal. For decades now, certainly since Lyndon Johnson, the American promise was that whatever insurance can't cover, the federal government will come in and and do. And I know that changes,
Yep.
incident by incident, but that's been kind of the deal.
It does feel like a raw deal. I think if we look back at the flooding and the hurricane damage in North Carolina, and particularly Asheville, I think they have the same complaints, and that was what.
And they got HUD money.
And they but they certainly did not get the rebuild. We didn't see. I think post Katrina, the federal government has cut back dramatically on what they're willing to do and what they feel their responsibility is.
Yeah, and the road from Katrina was more than a decade. It wasn't overnight.
And Mississippi still hasn't rebuilt. The Gulf Coast is still not back where it was and where it should be. There's still trailers, FEMA trailers being lived in the Mississippi Delta.
That's the question that so many people in St. Louis have, is who's going to have to wait the longest for help to get here first.
Yep.
Let me ask you about this Rams bill specifically, because it right now allocates $110 million to North City. There's a bill that would raise that to 115. Activists want 150 million. I'm sure you've heard their calls. You've advocated for downtown's share, 55 million.
We have.
And I wonder if that number may change too. Mayor Spencer told me this week she's not ruling out considering a bill that might send 150 million to North City. Where do you stand specifically on that number? What's at stake here if they whittle away at that 55 million that is right now proposed for downtown?
Well, I think there's 30 million that's been held in reserves that could be
And they're
activated.
racing to spend that. One alderman said this week he wants to spend it all.
Yeah, and I'm one of those that I could make the argument that having reserves makes sense, but I can also make the argument that the crisis is so great that we need to activate those dollars. Now there needs to be a plan to activate it, and so what I don't know, and I'm not an expert on, the folks they've been working on the north side for the last year are the experts on it. And if there's plans to activate those dollars very quickly that makes sense, then I think it should be looked at of how we put those there. But
what I hear from them is the most emergent need is just housing. Stabilize and build and protect housing so the asset doesn't dissolve.
Yeah, and I think one of the hard things is determining what gets stabilized and what you're better off building a new home for, and then what that new home looks like. We certainly wouldn't be building 3-story brick houses. We don't build those anymore. So it gets really hard. And having gone through some of this in Michigan and the Detroit model, what we don't want is 2 houses on a block and then there's no houses for 3 blocks. You lose sense of community, you lose churches, you lose retail.
There is space to spread out a little bit, but you don't want to have those big pockets of empty.
That's right. And so
what was your tie to Michigan and Detroit?
I worked in Michigan for 16 years and was very active on the work. Really, the whole state took on Detroit as a model, understanding that if Detroit didn't thrive, the entire state of Michigan couldn't thrive.
When did you leave there?
I left there 5 years ago.
What did Duggan get right?
Actually, Duggan gets a lot of credit. It literally wasn't him. It was the
He likes to say it was.
Yeah, it wasn't. He came in after the fact. It's
the mayor, for our viewers.
Yeah, it's a bit like Dan Gilbert gets a lot of credit with Quicken. They bought in the bargain. So really what happened is Rick Snyder the governor put an emergency manager in. Kwame Kilpatrick, the mayor, went to prison for all kinds of fraud.
They really hit rock bottom there.
It really hit bottom. Had to have an emergency manager came in, and then the community began to say, this is important to us, and we're going to invest. And you saw the Ford family invest, and you saw investments come in, but then you really saw strategies around moving homes. Whole homes were moved to create neighborhoods. And then they got crime under control. That was key. One of the things they did, and Rick Snyder shared this the other day when I was talking with him, was they took all the streetlights, all the new streetlights, have aluminum wire and not copper wire. Well, you think, well, what's the difference? There's no value in stealing a streetlight that has aluminum wire. You can't sell
Just
that.
a little bit of a smarter
scrap.
city. Yeah.
And so it was one of those things that I went, okay, I forgot that's how
savvy
they got. I think there was 5,000 streetlights or something that got turned on in a year.
And that made a big difference. That was one of the first things that Duggan did when he got in, was to start putting those streetlights in. And people, you have more light, you have less crime. People don't want to get caught. I do want to get to the data center conversation because that's where a lot of the growth is happening in the economy right now, and we'll get there. But if you had to look at it, You mentioned Detroit hit that rock bottom in 2011 or 2013 or so, and then they kind of came back. There was the auto industry decline. I know it's not apples to apples. There really never is an apples to apples perfect comparison. But knowing what you know from the national perspective, where are we on the Detroit timeline? Their population is growing again for the first time since the 1950s. Can we ever do that again here?
Oh, absolutely. I think by converting critical, they moved people downtown. So they converted office buildings to housing. Safety, number one, people are not, it doesn't matter the bargain, people are not going to move downtown if they don't feel safe. So we got to ensure that people feel safe. And right now we have more of a perception problem than a reality problem, but perception's still reality. So we got to make sure people feel safe. We've got to get speeding and traffic issues under control. And then we've got to maximize investment.
All right, let's talk data centers. You had a press conference this week to talk about the benefits, the upside. But we know that 70+%, sometimes 80% of the American public doesn't want it near them. What's the disconnect? If they're so great, why do so many people not want them?
Ignorance is the enemy. I think this idea that if that building said Tesla on the side of it, there'd be almost no protest.
I don't know if they're that popular these days, but
all right. Well, I mean, Tesla built a mile-long factory in outside of Austin, and people celebrated that. But a building that size, a 1 million square foot data center, is one of those things that people have misnomers about what's wrong and what's critical. And what we've got to do is take those out. A highly successful car wash, those misnomers out of the conversation. And let's talk about reality. A highly successful car wash does 300 cars a day, uses more water a year than data centers do. The almond industry in California uses more water a year than every data center and the power plants that power them than data centers do.
We took a close look at the water department here, and I think some of the scale and the usage, I think there is some misperception about the water usage. The water pollution is a different question. The water storage is a different question. And then the electric prices. I think there were some real concerns. I mean, you go back and anytime, it's human history. Anytime you see a revolutionary change coming, people get nervous. They want to know what their place is. I think one of the big concerns here is that these AI companies are taking our stuff, our thoughts, our knowledge, and then they're selling it back to us on a utility meter. It feels kind of like legalized robbery. It's not fair in the end game. And I know you're trying to build and collect tax revenue, but isn't there some part of that these companies that are coming in need to address what they're actually building and what they're taking?
I'm not sure I understand the question as much as
they blew through copyright licenses. They took books, they took academia, they took everything on the internet, and they said, it's now ours. We're going to sell it back to you at a cost.
Would it make you feel better if that data center doing that was in China or Montreal or Mexico City?
So there was going to be a robber anywhere. Just let it happen?
Then that's national policy that we should be talking about, protecting copyrights, protecting freedoms, protecting, the U.S. does a terrible job of, Europe has the right to be forgotten, that you can file and say, I want to be taken off the internet, and they have to comply with that. We don't have those rules. So if we have federal policy problems, that's different than local economics.
I want to ask you about your panel this week, because you said that online opposition to data centers is driven by bots from, quote, other nations that don't want us to succeed. Reporters later asked you, what did you mean by that? And you provided evidence from two right-wing outlets, the Washington Free Beacon and a Fox News piece, citing something called the Bitcoin Policy Institute. I don't know what that is. Is that your evidentiary standard for dismissing the concerns of people in Festus who showed up in gymnasiums full to voice their displeasure?
The state of Ohio has had multiple hearings on this and pretty well documented that the opposition is coming from outside interests who want to stifle growth of data centers in America and want to push them towards China.
That may be true, but there are also real people who have real concerns. It sounds like you're dismissing them.
Not at all. Not at all. And as I've written in an editorial last week, we have to address those real concerns, but we can't address the concerns of, Arnold Schwarzenegger and the Terminator are going to take over things, and the computers are going to shut off all of the heating and air, in our house. And, there's all this kind of crazy things that
I think most
just
people are
can't
worried
be
that their wages and their place in society are going to be replaced by some employer who decides that their labor is no longer worth as much.
If you're in the trades, there's never been a better time to be in the trades. Electricians have never made more money than they're making today. So we have to decide, do we want those electricians working here? Do we want them working in Texas or Iowa? Do we want their families to have a dad at home or a mom at home each night at dinner? Or do we want them calling at 7 o'clock from that camper that they're living in Texas working on those jobs?
Chase the growth, sort out societies later.
I can't control national and global big policy. What I can do is say the men and women of St. Louis deserve more and better jobs.
Ron Kitchens, I wish we had more time. I'm told we have to wrap it here, but thanks for your time.
Awesome, thank you.
We're back in a moment.